This has been a week of stories. At TIFF on Monday, I saw the movie Eleanor the Great, in which Eleanor Morgenstein, played by June Squibb, who probably deserves an Oscar for that performance, is in her 90s. She's just lost her best friend, Bessie, and without her, Eleanor feels utterly alone. Then by chance, as she moves from Florida to New York, she stumbles into a support group for survivors at the JCC. When asked to speak, she blurts out one of Bessie's stories and claims it as her own. As one critic wrote, she is not a survivor, but Bessie was. So she tells her story until the lies keep growing. What begins as one falsehood becomes another, until Eleanor is living inside an identity that isn't hers. On Wednesday, I watched The Road Between Us. It tells the story of Noam Tibon, the retired IDF general who on October 7th was texted by his son and daughter-in-law that they and their two young grandchildren were trapped in Nahal Oz as Hamas terrorists had begun their massacre. The army had not yet come, so Noam got in his car, grabbed his pistol, and he and his wife drove straight into the inferno. He literally crossed the road between them to rescue his family and 400 other people on that day. His story is terrifying and inspiring, not only a tale of massacre, but of love, of courage, and family. And then on Thursday night, at UJA Federation's gala opening, Douglas Murray spoke. Whether one agrees with all of his politics or not, what struck me was the way he framed his message. Civilizations rise and fall on the stories they tell about themselves. At the heart of today's cultural storm stands the Jewish story, ancient, embattled, indispensable. Three very different settings, but together they circle around one truth. Stories matter. They shape us. They define us. And sometimes they save us. This week's Parashat Ki Tavo begins with one of the earliest examples of commanded storytelling. When the Israelites bring their first fruits to the temple, they must not only present them, they must recite a story. Va'anita va'amarta lifnei Elohecha, you shall declare before the Lord your God, Arami oved avi. My father was a wandering Aramean. Vayered Mitzrayma, and he went down to Egypt. Vayagar sham b'mitmei ma'at, and lived there as a stranger, few in number. V'yihi sham l'goy gadol atzum, and there he became a great and mighty nation. This Mikra Bikorim continues with slavery, redemption, and arrival in the land of Israel. It is not enough to bring fruit and say, thank you. Every Israelite must place themselves inside the story of our people, even if their father wasn't literally a wandering Aramean, even if they never lived in Egypt. Because the Torah teaches us that identity is shaped not only by history, but by the stories we tell aloud together. The rabbis understood this. Rashi, in commenting on the phrase Arami oved avi, explains that the Aramean refers to Lavan, who sought to destroy Jacob. In other words, the declaration is not only about thanksgiving, but also about survival in the face of those who would seek to erase us. Midrash Tanchuma adds, that Israel recites this passage so as to not be ungrateful. Gratitude must be expressed in words, and words must be true. Our story, the rabbis insist, is gratitude rooted in truth, because without truth, memory collapses into distortion. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, captured this in his essay, A Sense of History. History is lived, he writes, but story is remembered. Story turns history into memory, and memory into identity. Judaism, he argued, is less about creeds than about narratives. We are who we are not by what we believe, but by what we remember and how we retell it. That is why we are commanded over and over again, Zachor, remember. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt. Remember what Amalek did to you. Remember the Sabbath day. Sachs insists a people that forgets its story loses its identity. A people that forgets its identity cannot survive. Ki Tavo is about survival through story. That's what made Eleanor the Great so unsettling. Eleanor tells Bessie's story as if it were her own. She does it for reasonable reasons, out of grief, out of loneliness, and out of the desperate need to keep her friend Bessie alive. On one level, it's a gesture of love. She doesn't want Bessie's story, the story surviving the Holocaust, to vanish. She wants to bear witness in her place. But here lies the danger. When a survivor's story is mistold, even with good intentions, truth begins to erode. And today, we know too well that once truth erodes, distortion and denial rush in. Holocaust denial is no longer confined to the margins. It circulates online, mutates into conspiracy theories, and appears in classrooms and in public discourse. Holocaust distortion is even more common. Minimization, false equivalencies, inversion of victim and perpetrator. The danger is not only forgetting, it is in the rewriting of memory until truth itself disappears. Eleanor's small lie dramatizes a much larger threat. If memory is not guarded, if testimony is not protected, distortion becomes denial. That is why the Torah fixes the words of Mikra Bechorim, Arami, oved, avi. Everyone must recite the same declaration, because memory must be disciplined or it will be twisted. From Eleanor the Great, I went to the road between us. On October 7th, when his son Amir, daughter-in-law, and 2 grandchildren were trapped in Nocholaz, Noam Tibon did what any father and grandfather would like to do, but what probably only a retired general can do. He got in his car, he armed himself, and he drove straight into danger. His story is terrifying, but also profoundly human. It's not only the story of a soldier or a general, it is the story of a father, a husband, a grandfather. It reminds us that at the heart of October 7th are families. Parents protecting children, families hiding in safe rooms, families torn apart, families struggling to hold together after unimaginable loss. The film also does something more. It uses actual footage from October 7th. Painful images, but necessary, because denial doesn't only threaten Holocaust memory. Denial is happening in real time. As this film was screened, protesters outside TIFF shouted slogans. One even had the gall to question whether there were really hostages in Gaza. Now just imagine that for a moment. How can you question whether there are hostages in Gaza when Hamas itself publicizes, declares, and is negotiating over the hostages in Gaza? And yet, denial still finds a voice in our streets here in Canada. That is why this film matters. It doesn't flinch from the truth. It bears witness. It insists this happened. There were victims. This is courage. This is pain. Torah warns in Ki Tavo, V'hayita lemashal, you shall become a byword, Ushnina b'chol ha'amim, and a proverb among the nations. If we do not tell our story truthfully, others will certainly twist it and deny it. The road between us is not really a film about war. It's a film about family, about the lengths a father will go to save his children and grandchildren, and about the truth that must be told for the sake of every family in Israel, for the sake of all of our people everywhere around the world. And then Douglas Murray. At UJA's opening, he reminded us that civilizations rise and fall on the stories that they tell about themselves. Today, the West's narratives are fraying. Into that vacuum, other voices rush in, often not voices of truth, but of lies. Murray warned, we are living in an age where lies spread faster than truth, and distortions gain more traction than facts. He pointed to the way Israel is spoken of in global forums, sometimes as if Hamas's atrocities on October 7th never happened, as if hostages do not exist, as if the Jewish story can be reduced to a false story of colonialism. This too is Ki Tavo. The Torah warns that if Israel forgets its covenantal story, if we do not tell our story truthfully, others will tell it falsely. If we do not root our identity in memory and covenant, others will redefine us through distortion. Murray's point at its sharpest is this: we cannot afford to be casual about the truth. Lies and distortion about Jews in Israel do not remain abstract. They have consequences in protests on our streets, in hostility on our campuses, in threats to our community. And so his warning echoes the Torah and Rabbi Sachs. A people that forgets its story loses its identity, but a people that allows its story to be distorted loses its dignity, its safety, and even its future. We see this here in Toronto. On campuses, Jewish students feel isolated. In the media, Israel's story is often reduced to the slogans shouted in protests. I was at TIFF. The protest, anti-Israel protest, was underwhelming, maybe 24 people, maybe 36 people. But if you watched the news that night, it seemed as if there were 1,000 people there. They received outside coverage, their voices drowning out the film itself. This is the challenge. If we do not speak, others will narrate for us. So what story must we tell? That the Jewish people are ancient, enduring, and alive. That Israel, despite pain, remains a homeland, refuge, and a miracle. That Jewish life here in Canada is vibrant, generous, and proud. We must proclaim these stories clearly because in them our future depends. And that's why the Torah commands storytelling, because story is sacred. It affirms continuity. It affirms communion, that my story is connected to yours. It affirms covenant. Our story is also God's story in the world. Arami, oved avi is not just history, it is theology. It proclaims that God acts in history through us, and that our telling keeps the covenant alive for generations. Shabbat Shalom.